Okay, well, let's start. Dennis is anxious for me to finish 3 and 4.
No, I just want to make sure you get through it,
Okay,
so I can do 5.
okay, we'll see what we can do here. Jane did chapter 3 last time and left just a couple of pages. So here's the quiz.
Okay.
What did we discuss last week?
It was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
2
What did we
weeks ago.
discuss?
2 weeks ago.
Oh, well, I answered the question. We didn't discuss anything last week.
Okay, how about 2 weeks ago?
You discussed the book, chapter 3.
We discussed the book.
Welcome to the new normal. We discussed that.
Okay. And what was the gist of it?
Okay.
I'm not going to keep you hanging out there, but it really talks about
This is when he has the taxi ride. Yeah. And he realizes that God's creation and God's love and everything is bigger than he had really allowed it to be.
And he also compares it to the changes, the adjustments that the Jews had to make because of historic events.
Right, going into captivity, coming out.
So let's move on. We'll move on for me here. At the very end of the chapter talks about the adjustments that the Jews had to make, and one was this idea of God being omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. The 3 omnis, as he calls them. And that really came from the Greek philosophers. It was the Greek influence on the Jews during the time when they were under Greek rule and all.
Well, don't you think this was a transition? People everywhere were starting to make that God wasn't a geographic being.
Right.
The world was getting bigger for those people.
Yeah. But it also, his point is that the time and place change, and the Greek influence replaced other influences earlier, and so you see this shift primarily in the New Testament of the Jewish Christians as they wrote the New Testament. And he says language was the Greek language really became the language of the Jews because they were under the Greeks, and so the way in which the Jews talked about God adjusted or changed. So these adjustments by Greek culture were officially embedded in Israel's sacred scriptures through the Greek translations of the Hebrew scriptures, necessary as Greek became the dominant language of Judaism.
Right.
Good morning.
Good morning. It is a good morning.
The two, what's interesting is the Masoretic, which basically means tradition, or the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. There were changes from that to the Septuagint, which was the Greek tradition. And so one example he says is, then the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. And the point is, the Greeks thought that was too human, that it was too
Anthropomorphic or whatever.
That's the word, anthropomorphic. Yeah, my lips are too cold. I can't get it.
Right. You said you can't form all the syllables.
So the Septuagint, which stands for 70, because there's supposedly 70 rabbis who were involved in the translation from Hebrew to Greek. Notice that the real differences are he pondered it deeply. So it's a more thoughtful, cerebral thought. And he still says, I'm grieved that I have made them, but it's rather than treating people as rather than God being a parent who is upset with his children, it's a more thoughtful thinking God. Jewish translations, again, what I just said, they made it look more philosophical and less like an upset parent taken by surprise. So anyhow, it's trying to show the shift that happened because of going from Hebrew to Greek and the influences of those different cultures. The final thoughts in chapter 3 are historically speaking. It seems it sure looks like adjusting to one's understanding of God is pretty normal. And this is a quote from the author. He says, because it is that we all adjust our thinking about God as life and experience impacts us. But the Bible and the history of our faith tradition models is the very process of adjusting our understanding of God to address the realities of our existence. Our God changes as our world grows and as there are more influences. We find our understanding to be inadequate. We are not wrong to listen to our instincts, and I threw in the spirit, and think with curiosity and seriousness that maybe our view of God is skewed and needs to grow. So the whole premise of that last chapter is maybe our view of God needs to grow, the same as the view of God held by the Jews changed over time. The author says Judaism has a history of adjusting the faith of old to meet the challenges of the new, which, as we've seen, began already in the pages of the Hebrew scriptures themselves. That is, changes made between the Hebrew to the Greek biblical text. And again, this James stuff I'm running through it fast. Judaism has a history called second paragraph here. When the twists and turns of history came their way, Jews did not respond simply by holding on to the old ways of thinking, but by adjusting the faith of old. So, again, the whole concept that we change as our circumstances change. So now we're into chapter 4. That was a fast chapter 3, right?
Well, what? You were just finishing up.
Yes. That was the wrap up. That's the wrap up. So the author makes a comment. It is no overstatement to say that the Christian faith from the very beginning has been in the business of making a series of significant adjustments to how its own Jewish tradition understood God. Anyone want to argue with the author? He tried to point out in the last chapter especially that there have been shifts, changes. Adjusting our understanding of God when the circumstances call for it is baked into the pages of Christianity's founding documents. What are our founding documents? Christianity's founding document?
New Testament.
New Testament, Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament. What else? Well, you're going to find out.
Well, there's some things that weren't put in the New Testament that at one time were accepted.
Yeah, true. So it's not simply acceptable, but vital for faith to thrive and grow, to adjust to these changes, our understanding. Does this mesh with restoration view of changes in Christianity?
It's okay. He could have stopped and raised his hand.
Well, you mean you're talking about our movement's restoration, early or later?
About any of them.
Well, early on, we said they were in apostasy.
Okay.
Oh, that's so easy to say, too.
Yeah. But going back further, Martin Luther thought there were things that needed to shift.
Right.
You know, he's the one you think of, but I'm sure there were many others who thought that
But the restoration
adjustments needed to be.
specifically thought that somehow the church had fallen into apostasy. Is that the early restoration? Early-
Yes.
And then
And what was it trying to do?
We wanted to go back to the original Christianity. That's what Joseph Smith thought
Okay,
he was doing.
okay. And what were some of those changes?
Well, he believed the priesthood was consistent with what was in the early Christian movement. And I don't agree with that, but that's what he thought.
But the New Testament does talk about 70s, and so we have 70s.
all the offices,
Co-apostle.
But there's only in that time there's only one high priest. Now we have lots of high priests. So
Well, and the Aaronic priesthood was more Old Testament,
Oh, give me the Old Testament.
at least according to Tony.
Yeah.
Well,
Punishing God? Well, not so much the punishing God, but the
I don't
priesthood.
know. I don't recall in early Christianity there were presbyters which became elders. I don't know that elders necessarily is in the Bible, as a priesthood office.
There were deacons.
Well, there's some question about what original Christianity was.
wait,
Certainly
say it
weren't
again.
bishops.
What was original Christianity? I mean, what point in time are you going to look at, say that's what we should be on? Because it's
Well, the
not a
early-
settled question in the early days of the church. They were still figuring out what they thought they should be.
Well, and at the same time, revivalism was a big thing. There were a lot of new religions that popped up that believed the same thing, that they were going back to the original foundations of Christianity at first century.
Campbell-like movement.
You know, conducts.
My daughter and son-in-law were exploring going to a church in Portland, and she sent me their creed. And one of them was that only the Bible is the Word of God. And I'm thinking, oh, Liz, how did I go wrong raising them? They don't go there. But anyway,
They were just taking it.
they were just checking it out. Yeah.
What's interesting too about considering this is we've gone from a church that was trying to get back to original Christianity to modern day prophecy, latter day prophecy that suggests it's time to think of things in new ways.
Exactly.
Then you spring forward to Royceville Road, but of course it's been probably 65 years ago. Did the light go out? And he basically says, well, it didn't, which is basically refuting the early belief.
Right.
Well, and Tony would agree with that they weren't really putting together the original church.
That's that kind of parallels the historian's view of the Middle Ages, or one of the views of the Middle Ages was nothing good happened during those several centuries.
Yeah.
No progress was made. People weren't intellectual. It's just the lights, exactly, like the lights went out. And it's not exactly that clear cut.
The lights just got dim, okay?
So I take it our view has changed a little bit about the original church and the restoration of that church, and
Sounds like it
sounds like it.
from the discussion.
I'm not the same as I was 70 years ago. I can learn, I can still grow. Okay. And I can bask more in what I'm learning. And I think that's the same for all of them.
What about Zion, the concept of Zion? How has it changed for our church?
Well, we're much more of a worldwide church rather than a church that believed in gathering to the center place in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, and we've talked about that in this class before, that it's more of a kingdom of God. It's on earth for all of us. We all participate in it. It's more of the the salt of the earth as opposed to let's cluster together into one location unto ourselves.
And I will say I learned this week that Jason Briggs actually changed his mind from a physical gathering, which he was trying to push Joseph III to do, and Joseph was saying, not now, not now, we've done this 4 times, it always ended badly, to about the time that he left the church, he believed more in a spiritual gathering than a physical gathering.
Oh, I like that.
And he kept trying to push his ideas, but the people weren't ready yet. So he and I guess Zenas Curley Jr. both left kind of in disgust because we weren't moving fast enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Does that sound familiar?
we definitely, I'm glad somebody learned from the fact that when we gathered all together, things went bad.
That was partly the way we gathered, though. Some of our attitudes
Yeah,
in the gathering,
some of that
it
had
wasn't
to do with it.
necessarily the physical concept, but
Yeah.
the attitude we brought with it.
Well, the attitude we brought with it, the fact that we were changing the political outlook because we were a bunch of Northeasterners and they were, basically more Southern, slave and abolition.
Yeah, clash of cultures. And I don't want to get ahead. You, Jonathan, you might cover this, but there's definitely parallels between our restoration movement and then what the Jews went through during and after exile. And I think I read the chapter briefly, and the author talks about sacred geography, and how they had to reinterpret, some of their theology because it was very geographic bound.
Well, that's a great segue because I'm going to talk next about their concept of the promised land. And what's interesting is if you look at Genesis 15:8, the land given to Abraham by God includes areas occupied today by a whole host of countries. And then you go to Numbers, which is Moses. First one is Abraham, second one is Moses. And literally Numbers delineates the borders of the promised land, the land that will belong to the Jews. And then Deuteronomy says, so acknowledge today and take to heart that the Lord is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. There is no other. Keep his statutes and his commandments, which I am commanding you today for your own well-being and that of your descendants after you, so that you may long remain in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for all time. And I used the New Revised Standard updated version there. I'm throwing in several different versions as we go along today. So the plan, that's the promise, that land would belong to the Jews forever. So the curveballs that they had to face, the Assyrian Empire, 1722, conquered them. Babylonian Empire in 586 BC. These are before Common Era, before Christ. The Romans occupied in 63 BCE. And then after 636 CE, we have everything from the Caliphates to the Crusaders to the Ottoman Empire to the British and the League of Nations, all somehow had control of this land that was promised to the Jews. And so here's the at least one interpretation of what that original land looked like. The red line is the area that was promised to them, and the red slice and pie is Israel.
The modern state of Israel?
The modern state of Israel.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that the biblical promised land was so
I didn't either.
large.
I thought it was I knew it was larger than the state of Israel,
But it went from the Wadi of Egypt all the way to the Euphrates. And I've read several places where the southern boundary was uncertain, but we assume it was somewhat of a straight line. After all, this is God talking. So it gives you an idea that their concept of the promised land changed even as our concept of Zion changed with time and circumstances. In Judaism, the Messiah, there's another curveball that was thrown, was that of the Messiah. Mashiach, or the anointed one, or Christ, or Christos in Greek, is a future human leader from the lineage of David who will do these things. Usher in an era of universal peace, rebuild the temple, gather the Jewish people for Israel. Numerous figures have claimed that role, often during times of oppression, and most of them have been subsequently, my mouth still doesn't work this morning, claimed to be false messiahs. Yes.
Yeah, devil's advocate. Does that mean Herod was the Messiah? He built the temple.
Oh, Herod?
Herod, right?
Well, some of the
He
kings
did one of those things.
some of the kings were declared as messiahs, and if you go through, I went through and there's a list of messiahs, failed messiahs, starting with Christ and going after. But there are also three of them that Josephus named prior to Christ or Jesus that were identified as messiahs at one point in time. Most of them are revolutionary.
Yeah.
So the question then is, what is Jesus a king? And the author talked about the repatriated Jews. Who are they?
The ones that returned.
The ones who what?
Returned.
Oh, right. The ones who returned. Okay. They were expecting God to wrest control of the land from the Roman overlords by placing an appointed king on the throne in Jerusalem, as in the days of old. How did Jesus fulfill or not fulfill that?
Well, he didn't wrest control from the Rome's overlords. He did not. There was no anointed king on the throne. So his was a different concept from doing all these physical things to trying to change hearts and minds.
Okay.
Souls.
Yeah, the picture's kind of giveaway. He comes in on a donkey.
Yeah.
Well, that was supposed to be kind of a sarcastic statement to the Romans, I think. Says, for Christ to be called the Christ, it's not some otherworldly divine designation, but a statement of belief that Jesus would be the king who would reverse Israel's sad, centuries-long period of misfortune of being subjects in their own land. So there was this expectation. Now, we're shifting from curveballs thrown at the Jews to curveballs thrown at the Jewish Christians, who then became Christianity. And this is the quote that appears in the book that or is referenced. But Pilate basically saying, "Are you king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "Is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me?" And Pilate says, "Am I a Jew?" And Pilate replies, "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" And Jesus then goes on to say, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." That language is from the New International Version, not the New Inspired, but New International Version. So he's basically saying he's a king, is he, or not?
He's saying that he has a kingdom, but it's not here.
Okay, it's not a threat to Rome.
Right.
But I have a problem with that when I go back to the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Well, then we have to consider what kind of a kingdom he's talking about.
On earth.
Well, is it, our kingdoms on earth always have territories and
I don't know.
and armies and
It might just
I'm just
be
saying
independent.
there's a
Tension?
something going on here that's not of this world. Is probably not what we're thinking of.
yeah. Well,
Well,
it certainly would not have been what the Jews would think.
Yeah.
And it says, thy kingdom come. Like, it hasn't come yet. It's still coming. Maybe.
Yeah. I see it like.
But I like what he says in the book, that the Jews were confused. He said, and then he is putting words in their mouth how they may have responded as they got to know Jesus. What are you talking about, Jesus? Not of this world? Of course it is. Read your Bible. Have you ever heard of what happened to our ancestors in the exile? And just look at our recent history of foreign domination. Getting our land back is the whole point. You know, I'm sure that some of them were talking about, we need our land back.
Yeah.
You know, it's promised to us. I mean,
I'm sympathetic.
And I'm sure they were confused.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when he said it's at hand, okay? Kingdom's at hand.
I know, it's still at hand.
No. Well, what did Peter do in the Garden of Gethsemane?
He challenged the Romans.
Yeah.
Cut the soldier's ear off.
Cut an ear off.
And he anticipated that. I mean, we can only guess what he was thinking, but clearly he was thinking that this is the king, and this is the start of the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right. Up with this.
Yeah. And so 12 were going to take on the entire
Roman Empire.
Or maybe they thought
They
legions of angels would assist or something.
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
Thinking was, but,
Somebody brought their trumpet.
Yeah.
Well,
shofar.
Again, the curveball is, and we've already addressed this. They assumed that the Messiah would be interested in sacred geography and returning the land to Israel, and not be crucified, not end his life on a cross.
Jesus' sacred geography was in the hearts of the people.
Yeah. So the crucifixion in the New Testament viewed as a sacrifice. This is another curveball of a sense. What about the blood of the martyrs? What does that mean?
Well, I don't know, because I've always had a hard time with the whole idea of atonement, period. Anywhere at any time. It's fair. I just,
Well, yeah, because some of the beliefs were Jesus had to die to save us.
Yeah.
And so how did that work? I learned this the first trimester and it's
and it slipped away.
Oh my gosh, my brain is dead today. But there were others who said, we owe it to Jesus, whereas others said it was a little more nuanced than that.
Okay, what do the Jews take to the temple to sacrifice?
Doves or unblemished
They take
lambs.
live animals.
Okay, so they were used to sacrificing to a god, you could say was an angry god, that had to appease. And yet here we have the crucifixion, which is the crucifixion of the Son of God, and somehow that didn't seem right to them. That the crucifixion was a sacrifice made not to God, but on behalf of God to humankind.
Well,
So shift in.
Sacrifice was one view of crucifixion, not the only one.
Right. And the author has a side note, which you all have already addressed. Incidentally, this is why it is wrong to think of Jesus' sacrifice as something Jesus did to calm God down, to appease God's wrath. So, but he's also trying to show that it was a curveball, a change in what the Jews anticipated. They anticipated that sacrifices would be because God demanded it, not because God was offering it to us. Now, again, that's a slightly different slant on Christian belief on the crucifixion, but
Paradigm shift.
And even after Jesus was crucified, they continued to offer sacrifices. In Acts, they record that.
But
so
there was some place earlier where, was it Isaiah or was it later, that God didn't want the sacrifices, he wanted their hearts.
Amos,
thank you.
well, let's face it, there are mixed messages throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
And some of those mixed messages are probably because the time and place of the people changed, therefore their understanding of God and what he required changed. So basically, the author is saying the crucifixion of the Messiah required too big of an adjustment for many. As Paul put it, Christ crucified is a stumbling block to Jews and a foolishness to the Gentiles. What does that mean? How is a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to Gentiles?
Well, I think we've already talked about the paradigm shift for the Jews, but I'm trying to get my head into the mind of a Gentile. I mean, it was very much, well, I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else can answer that.
Well, he would have been viewed as a criminal in Roman law. I mean, he was put on a cross. That was the crime of, that was a political crime, really,
Crucifixion.
for crucifixion. So they would have thought, why would I, I'm a Roman.
Yeah, who is this guy?
This guy,
Yeah.
I mean, that would be very puzzling.
And he had no power, so why were they claiming him to be who he was?
Right.
I'm not sure what the author's thinking is about this, but I know in the early Christian movement, the notion of atonement was deeply argued between the two sides for a long time. Now, we've retained a lot of that atonement theology of the death of Jesus as paying a penalty for human sin, but to a Jew, that would have been a stumbling block because they believed that they could go to God directly for forgiveness, and that forgiveness could be granted and not require a human sacrifice. So that would have, for the Jewish side. I think for the Gentile side, probably the same thing, but maybe for different cultural reasons, that the notion of somebody sacrificing their life to forgive them for something that they did wrong, just didn't make sense.
And it would certainly seem inconceivable to a Gentile who might be used to multiple gods and territorial gods. It would seem foolish that a god would sacrifice someone so close, a son, on behalf of humanity.
Yeah.
And then the New Century Version, that's the third version I'm throwing in today, if you're keeping track. It says, the Jews ask for miracles and the Greeks want wisdom, but we preach a crucified Christ. This causes the Jews to stumble and is foolishness to non-Jews. The Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God to those people God has called, Jews and Greeks. So that's the reference that in 1 Corinthians. That's Paul's words in the New Century Version. Another curveball, the Hebrew Bible speaks of a future when the Gentile nations will flock to Jerusalem to worship the true God. How's that happen?
They do pilgrimages.
What?
Pilgrimages?
Yes, that's true.
Those tend to be individuals, not nations.
Right.
Well, it goes back to the prophet Isaiah, who talked about Jerusalem as being the river that would flow out to the world, to take, their knowledge of the one true God to the world, and that people would flock to the city of Jerusalem as a result of that. So it's an ancient prophecy.
And how would we all fit Jerusalem?
yeah, but if you took out Jerusalem and just said they worship the true God, you could say, the monotheistic
Concept
concept.
took hold.
And yes, that hasn't really took hold either among the nations. There aren't many nations that believe in a one true God.
When you put it in restoration terminology, Isaiah was talking about Zion.
Yeah.
I don't think he used that term, but the notion is very familiar to us.
Says, however, the Apostle Paul takes it further in his letters. Gentile believers in Jesus are co-equal with Jews as children of Abraham. Thus, Gentiles would not need to convert Judaism to be true children of Abraham and followers of Jesus. So wasn't a matter of flocking to Judaism and to Jerusalem. It was a matter of basically Paul saying Jews and Gentiles are equal and are all children of Abraham and followers of Jesus. Through the crucified and resurrected Messiah, God reconciled Jews and Gentiles as equal in status. So this goes back to another whole discussion we've had in the past about how Paul basically said, you don't have to follow the Jewish laws, the letter of the law, to become a follower of Christ.
Of course, all this is, like we've talked before, this is all Pauline theology, not necessarily Petrine theology.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, let's face it, circumcision would be a big turnoff to a lot of men wanting to convert to Judaism if they were going to be.
Oh, no.
And then there were the dietary laws too.
Yeah. Christians may take that for granted today, but this represented the social and religious upheaval at the time. Mm-hmm. So the Gentiles somehow were the children of Abraham and followers of God, just simply by belief, not by action, not by following the law. So why is this important? Well, the adjustments by Paul and the other New Testament writers formed Christianity as a distinct religion from Judaism. The author is saying that because of the changes, because of Paul's emphasis on all can be followers and believers, and you don't have to follow the Judaic law per se, that was a major shift from old. Over time, about the second century CE, Christianity largely was populated by Gentiles. And so again, the people, the place, the countries, their cultural background influenced Christianity and changed over time.
Yeah, so Greek,
very nature of Christianity.
So Greek thought took over Jewish thought.
Yeah. As distinct as Judaism and Christianity have become, they are united at least in this respect. And this is where I want to react to. Both have a history of making adjustments to their shared sacred scripture in light of unforeseen, even paradoxical circumstances. You buy it?
Well, I think our understanding is always changing throughout time.
Have there been changes in our shared scripture based on unforeseen, paradoxical and circumstances?
At least in our understanding of the scriptures.
How specifically?
Go ahead, Arlene.
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, would you say Dennis?
I said, go ahead, Arlene.
Oh.
I think within the religions, yes, that's true. Between the religions, it's absolutely not. We just read the slide where Paul said that the Jews and the Gentiles were, what was the term that he used? Reconciled. Yeah. And, we're not. 2,000 years we've been fighting like cats and dogs with between Christians and Jews. So reconciliation either was a failed prediction on Paul's part, or we didn't understand what Paul was trying to say. But within Christianity and within Judaism, yeah, I think there are those times when certainly within the community of Christ, we've made adjustments as we've gone along.
Yeah. I'm about to say, think about the Doctrine and Covenants and all the changes in our view of Christianity within our own sect.
And then we have the enduring principles that we are trying to, the worth of all persons, whereas before, not all persons had worth. And yes, sometimes with some people, I still have problems with their worthiness, but that's between them and God and not me. And I need to be a little more forgiving, I guess.
Well, what's the Doctrine and Covenants instruction given in previous times needs to be, I'm paraphrasing, reevaluated. Or,
Yeah.
Reevaluate.
Yeah.
Well, with the New Testament writers reinterpreted a lot of things, I believe, to make things in the Old Testament, everything had to point towards Jesus. I'm not sure everything does, but they wanted it to, right? Because they felt he was such an important figure. He was an important figure, but I think they kind of massaged the understanding of some of the ancient prophets to make Jesus seem more important, I guess, or be more of a solid figure to follow. I don't know.
There, if you take a look at the Hebrew scriptures versus our Old Testament, I'm talking about Old Testament scriptures,
right?
Even the order in which the books appear,
right,
are different. Ours ends with clear look toward a Messiah. There's, I think, with minor prophets, I can't remember offhand, but
well, and then there's a difference between the order. There's a difference between the Septuagint and the Hebrew.
Right.
And that's really what I'm referring to.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about the Christian Old Testament.
Well, the Christian Old Testament versus the Jewish Old Testament.
Yeah.
Christian faith is what it is today because of adjustments the New Testament writers made to their own ancient Jewish tradition. So what were you saying? They made changes. Christianity is not a purely biblical religion, but a living, adaptive tradition based on the ancient biblical witness. And it's interesting. This Enns is not a Latter-day Saint or Restorationist or Community of Christ member. He's looking at it strictly from a biblical standpoint, and yet he's got one book. He's got one. We have 3. And he's still saying it's not purely a biblical religion.
Well, we shouldn't really look at the Bible as one book. It's actually
a collection of books. Yeah.
But you just talked earlier about religions that's what that's the whole thing. Yeah. But it's amazing. It's amazing how much of the Bible fits today when it was written so many thousand, a couple of thousand years ago, but yet it's so adaptive to today's culture. And we realize that we haven't changed all that much because it fits with what
I don't think anybody's saying that it doesn't apply, simply that how we interpret it has changed. And of course, as a church, we believe that there's been continual revelation, more information about what God is, who God is, what he's about, that sort of thing, what he or she is about, whatever. Dennis?
Well, I could take the opposite viewpoint and saying there are some things in there we are still retaining that we should have discarded long ago.
It's true.
Yeah.
And particularly the physical content. We'll get into that in chapter 5. It's one before chapter 5.
Where a teaser for next week.
That's a teaser, yeah. That where Earth fits in the cosmos, or in our solar system, even. Back then it was the center. Now it's the third rock.
Okay. Again, another quote from the author. The Jesus movement began as an inner dialogue with Jewish tradition while in conflict with Rome, with the expectation that God's judgment to set everything right was just around the corner. But it soon shifted to a Gentile world with Gentile questions and answers, namely philosophical ones. And
I thought the Jesus movement was in the 60s.
some of the Gentile concerns, which to us seem old hat, I'm sure, our core beliefs about the nature of God, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit. And how were those addressed? We talked earlier about early Christian documents. And this is where we get back into those. You want a hint, huh?
I was going to say the Apostles' Creed.
Well, the Nicene Creed, 325, amended in 381, and just the shortest part of it says, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. And that's just one small part. And what are they trying to do there?
Well, some of it had to do with some of the other beliefs that were being, such as Gnosticism, where Gnosticism might be one of them, but there were other things that were where God had, Jesus wasn't truly human, but he had this human part, but he was, and it was like they couldn't mesh the two together. I don't know. There were a lot of different beliefs coming out that were later declared heretical.
And that's what the Chalcedonian Creed addressed in 451. It's even more philosophical. Again, remember, we're getting into that time with the Greek influence, where they're more cerebral in many ways rather than commandment oriented.
It seems to me that the Greeks were trying to be precise in who Jesus was, and the Jewish would have left it a lot more vague or
Mysterious
or whatever. And they were, because of their language, they could, I mean, some of these words are very, just one little, letter changes the meaning, and I don't know if our English language can pick all that up, but they get into a lot of philosophical debate stuff.
Well, just a small taste of the Chalcedonian Creed. Jesus is described as truly God, truly man, addressing the issue that you brought up, of a reasonable, rational soul and body, substantial. Told you I can't talk today. Sharing the same essence with the Father according to the Godhead. So again, the issue began. First of all, the issue for Nicaea, primary one was, well, what is the very nature of God? What is the nature of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit? And then they started refining in the Chalcedonian Creed, saying, okay, what about Jesus? Is he a man or is he a God? So,
and this is in a time when people thought gods could be men or humans.
Yeah.
There's much more concept that was acceptable back then. Back now, it seems like.
Well, even if you look at Numbers, before the part we quoted, they talked about the sons of God walking among men, and enticing the women to have children and all this sort of thing. So there was this concept in Judaism and in many cultures that gods walked among us and did as they pleased. So,
somewhere in Acts it talks about Peter, and I think it was Peter and one of the other disciples, apostles. They cured somebody, and the people around said, "You must be gods," and they said, "No, we're just humans."
Yeah.
But I mean,
and the Greeks had all sorts of gods and goddesses.
yes,
and did the Romans.
Yeah.
Well, they even, in the book of Acts, they even had the unknown God in case they missed it. But
Oh, yeah, because was it Paul that said
that was Paul that said, here's the unknown God. It's the God I'm talking to you about. Well, that's, the early church, again, this was a source of disagreement between people as to whether Jesus started out human and became Christ, or there was a pre-existent Christ who came to this earth as a human. And the New Testament is not real clear on that either. I mean, John talks about Jesus being the begotten from the time of his birth, or even a pre-existent time, whereas I think it's Mark, at the baptism of Jesus, God says, this day you are my begotten son. So he was an adult by then.
And Paul more or less thought it was.
Was that?
And Paul more or less thought it was when he was crucified and resurrected.
Yeah, and yeah, some thought
That he
that,
became
some thought
divine at that point.
some thought that when he was crucified, we talked about this. He gave up his Christness for that period of time, and then it was restored. Yeah, afterward. Well, lots of different ways that people thought about that.
So these were the Gentile concerns, trying to redefine Christianity, what it means, what it meant to be a believer. And of course, as Pearl pointed out, there were a lot of dissenting views. A lot of people were ostracized or
I can't even remember. I can't even remember all the dissenting opinions that we read.
Yeah.
With all the different isms.
So, a topic for another day, but one I'm curious about is with these ecumenical councils like Nicaea and Chalcedon, with so many differing opinions, how did they get it settled?
I don't think they did.
They voted on
I think it kept morphing as new people came out with new ideas, and they said, no, that's not right. So we've got to fix it again. And
well,
I think it's just an ever-changing understanding.
That may be, but I'm still curious about how.
but the emperor called
Yeah.
He convened a conference there.
Yeah.
And he kind of stacked the deck, so he didn't invite some bishops, he invited other bishops. And he wanted to have a a consensus or a unity in his empire. And so
sort of the way they came up with what became the
So get in there and
New
figure it out.
Testament.
Don't come out until you do.
they just over the years they would meet together, and I think the book of Thomas, not the infant one, was close to being in, but they wanted
accepted the biblical
canon. I think it missed out by 1 or 2 votes from what I learned earlier.
well, Revelations, what I remember, Revelations only got in by 1 vote.
Yeah. Too bad.
Well, the author says the ancient creeds are not a repetition of the biblical language. So clearly there's not a repetition. There's not a repeat of what was in the Bible. This is men, and I think they're all men.
Yeah,
Were there any women in there? So,
probably not.
trying to define what God
That's where the problem.
uses and Holy Spirit represents.
So maybe that's where the problem lies.
Well,
I was gonna.
by the time of the conference, I think it was all men, but there was a period in time when it's
Early
Yeah,
Christian.
first
early
Christians were
century.
led by women.
Yeah.
where Paul refers to, and there's the debate about this, Junius or Junia. It's changed to a male name.
Yeah.
And they say it was changed from a feminine to a masculine.
Mm-hmm. And there was a Phoebe and a Tabitha but there were women that ran the church houses or hosted the church houses.
The Junia is called out as an apostle.
But yeah, as it started, then in the 2nd century, they started cutting women.
Priscilla or something.
Yeah, there were a few names.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'm going to move on. Just as Isaac did, the author says we must wrestle and adjust our understanding of the nature of God. And from our previous discussion this morning, I think you sort of agree that the answer is yes, we do need to adjust our concept of God, but not totally. How we understand God has consequences, and I think Pearl made a comment about this, or someone did earlier. Understand God has consequences for how we treat others. If we see God as drawing thick lines between groups of people, we will feel justified in doing so ourselves. If we believe God is vindictive, we are only a small step from justifying belligerence toward and even violence against the other in the name of God, an alarmingly recurring fact of Christian history that still thrives today in strands of Christian fundamentalism and Christian nationalism. Agree?
Yeah. Definitely right now.
The authors suggest pay attention to our curveballs, see them as invitations that take us beyond our familiar ideas of God, vital to a mature, meaningful, and hopeful life of faith. So don't avoid the curveballs. Our faith can then remain sustainable and meaningful because it listens to the challenges of the present as we follow God, the God who is always out ahead of us, ready to surprise us. And our church has done that too, right? Concept of Zion has changed. Concept of priesthood has changed. Concept of women
with great
in the
pain
priesthood has
sometimes
changed.
too.
Yeah.
I said with great pain.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Because we've lost a lot of brothers and sisters,
Right.
you know. Maybe we didn't do it well or something, but you know, it's not an easy process.
Right.
Yeah, Enns recognized
We've got to share.
it was painful for him.
Yeah.
I mean, he talks about how he was afraid because of his community that he grew up in, you know, that he was
They would think he was
getting
kind of
off the,
nut.
you know,
Or been confined to the underworld.
Yeah.
Well, this third point, yes, John.
You know, it's interesting when you look at all of this, and I'm looking back at the 36 years I spent as an evangelist. God has always prepared us according to what we're able to perceive and understand and go. And there's truth in all of these. And all of these brought good to some of the people in some ways that they needed according to what God perceived their needs to be at the time. In psychology, we have a term called confirmational bias, and sometimes we begin to look at things and we give them more credibility depending on what we personally believe. But just like in our church, I get upset when people want to pick apart Joseph's revelations and all the things that happened. But God gave that to us at a time when we needed certain things, and he gave it to us in a way that we were prepared to comprehend and use. And they maybe weren't theoretically correct in what we have found out today, but for what we needed at that time, it met a need. And I found that God told me, my stubborn self, said, John, quit fighting this priesthood stuff. You know, I will put my words in your mouth and I will lead you to those things that you need to know when I need to know them. And I've trusted that, and that's led me in all my dealings in ministry with all different denominations, all different nationalities, you know, to realize that every single person that God created is of worth to him. He loves them. You know, I put people in jail for serious crimes in my careers, and knowing at the same time God led me to know that he loved that person and that person was of worth to him. And regardless of what we do in our human understandings and making restrictions and what's right and wrong in our judgment, his overcomes it all. And eventually, as we grow and as we expand, even as we've expanded outside of some of the rigid outlines of our faith, we find out that, you know, we're not so different after all. We're just approaching things from a different way. And as we grow and we grow together, which God meant for us to do to begin with, and if you look at the Old Testament, look how much New Testament's in the Old Testament. And the New Testament was just a refinement according to our understanding and our needs at that time. God continues to develop us that way. And it's good to look at different people's approaches to things, but we need to understand that, you know, God's designed our lives and he's laid them in front of us. He's given us agency, and he helps us grow, and as we respond to our agency, good, bad, or indifferent sometimes. But in the all, we all come together. We just come in accordance with the plan he laid down for us, enveloped in his love and his protection and his forgiveness for us. That's why we have the sacrament of renewing the covenant. he knew that we were going to do these things, and he didn't want us ostracized from us. He wanted to lay down an understanding that we would have, that we could come like we will today and say, God, I goofed up, and I'm really sorry. Can I start this over again? And so he's done that
we're
throughout
all
history.
really kind of a work in progress.
Yeah.
And God understands that. Within the church and within history, we're all
Yeah, but
really
none of
just
these
a
are
work in
absolutely
progress.
wrong. They all have a similarity, and they all come together. And as time progresses, and as we grow into what God's laid out in front of us, we're growing closer together.
Yeah. The author also makes a point. We're running out of time, so I'm going to cover this quickly. He basically says that wrestling with our faith doesn't mean we abandon it all. We don't chuck it all.
Yeah.
That means that we look and learn and realize what needs to be refined into our beliefs. Adjusting our understanding of God is never about throwing it all away and starting from scratch. And it's not dissimilar. The struggle of the ancient Jews under foreign occupation and the struggle of the first followers of Jesus as they tried to bring together the old, that was not a dissimilar kind of struggle that they had. Always a concern how my faith community will react to my thoughts. And he spent some time talking about that we need to be bold and brave in our discussions with each other. Should our views of God stand still our whole lives? I think we have already talked about the fact that they just don't. I mean, when it's a child and then when it's adult, things change. But just because we exist, and our existence always finds a way of exposing the inadequacies of our understanding of God and how the universe works. So he basically talks about the life of faith is not sticking to one set of beliefs without change. It's a matter of adapting. Nothing is permanently settled. And he talks about deeper curiosity. He talks about the mystery of God, and I like that concept that heavens are shouting to us, and the word that it shouts is mystery. That we are still learning. And with that, I just want you to know, in the blink of an eye, it'll be next week.